Hello, and welcome to the UK Forestry webinar series. I'm Billy Thomas, an Extension Forester here in the Department of Forestry at the University of Kentucky. We're coming from you live tonight from the campus of the University of Kentucky. Tonight, we're going to have a webinar on the Kentucky's Forest Health Update. I do have a couple presenters that I'll introduce here in a second, but before we get started, there are a couple of housekeeping items we need to address. First, if you're at a county extension office, your agent should have a copy of the handouts as well as an evaluation for you to complete. Please take a few minutes before you leave tonight to finish that evaluation. Your feedback's really important to us, and we'll use that to try to improve as we go forward. Another housekeeping item is if you're a master logger. Master loggers are eligible to get 1 hour of continuing education credit for this program, but only at a hosting county extension office. So I'm sorry if you're a master logger and you're at home, we can't give you credit for it, but if you are at an extension office, you can get a credit for it. So your agents do have those forms. And I would also like to thank the county extension agents who are serving as hosts for this event. We certainly appreciate their support opening up their offices and hosting this event for us. All right. And then I would like to thank you all for being with us. We recognize you could be in a lot of different places doing a lot of different things, but you chose to be with us, and I think it'll be worth your while. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our presenters tonight and get started with the webinar. We have two folks with us tonight that I'm really delighted to have. We're going to be talking about Kentucky's forest health, and I have Dr. Ellen Crocker and Abe Nielsen from the Kentucky Division of Forestry. So, Ellen, this is a really important topic we're going to be talking about. Certainly the health of Kentucky's forests is important to all of us. So I'm really excited that you and Abe are going to be here presenting this information tonight.
We're excited to be here. Thanks for inviting us, and we hope that a lot of what we're going to be talking about tonight is going to be a brief introduction to topics that we could talk about all night. So we're just going to be scratching the surface with a lot of these forest health issues in Kentucky.
Along those lines, if you do have questions, please use the chat pod. There should be an option up in your upper left-hand corner. Just use that chat pod to get questions to us, and we'll monitor those questions throughout the night. But there will be a dedicated time a few times throughout the evening to ask questions. So I guess without any further ado, we'll go ahead and get started with the presentation. Again, thank you all so much. Thank you all for being with us. It's going to be a good evening.
So thanks again, everyone, for being here. It's a pleasure to be here tonight talking with you, and it's great having Abe Nielsen here with us as well from Kentucky Division of Forestry. We figured we'd start this webinar off just really briefly with talking about what we mean by forest health. So although we're going to be talking primarily about insects and diseases that are harming trees, I wanted to kind of put a reminder out there that most insects and diseases don't have a negative effect on our woodlands and forests, and that forest health, a healthy forest, doesn't equal a forest without any dead or dying trees. When we're talking about forest health and a healthy forest, what we mean is that the level of mortality or damage to trees is at an acceptable level. It's kind of within normal ranges as far as what we want for that woodland or forest that lets it be productive, both for us but kind of for the environment as well. So it's going to stay a forest, it's going to provide important ecological benefits like habitat, it's going to be productive and naturally regenerating in most of our forests. So the good thing that I wanted to start us out with is that our forests are doing relatively well compared with other regions of the country. So this year we've had no major droughts, other than the emerald ash borer, which we'll talk about, no massive diebacks. And you can compare this to other parts of the country, say the western states, that have been experiencing really terrible forest health conditions, a lot of mortality, a lot of death due to a combination of invasive insects, diseases, drought, and of course fire. So relatively speaking, we're going to be talking about things that are kind of scary, things that are on the horizon are already here, but Kentucky is doing really well, and part of that is the diversity of species that we have in our forests. So the high diversity buffers the impact of a lot of these problems. Nonetheless, Abe and I are here tonight to highlight a few of the things that we are seeing and the potential threats that are on the horizon that we would like to avoid in the future. As Billy mentioned, there's a chat box right there. If you've got questions as we're going through this presentation, feel free to ask them. Hopefully we'll get them right away, but if we don't, we'll take a few breaks throughout the presentation to look at what's in the chat box and get back with you on those. And then there'll also be time at the very end for what other questions might have come up. So with that, I'm going to give you an overview of what we're talking about today. So first we're going to focus on the major issues in the state, looking at emerald ash borer, hemlock woolly adelgid, invasive plants, and fire. Then we're going to talk about some regional or less severe problems that we've seen this year: jumping oak gall, yellow-poplar weevil, Shingle Oak Skeletonizer, and Anthracnose, as well as some other fungal foliar diseases. Finally, we're going to talk about future threats and give you some forest health tips, things that we want to emphasize in the long term, regardless of what we're talking about, to keep our forests healthy.
Okay, so tonight we're going to get started with the major issues. We're going to start with emerald ash borer. So of the pests and diseases that we're going to be discussing, this is most likely going to be the most familiar. And the reason for that is, one, because it's so widespread in Kentucky. Right now, emerald ash borer is found in about 2/3 of the state. And then also because of the heavy impacts from this insect in the large number of trees that it has been killing. So the emerald ash borer is an invasive beetle. It's a green beetle in the upper right part of your screen there. It was introduced into Michigan from Asia in 2002, and it feeds on ash species. So in Kentucky, the three most common species that you're going to see are white ash, green ash, and blue ash. And then it also, just within the last couple of years, was found to feed on white fringe tree, which is a small tree, a large shrub that is also in the same family as ash. The way that the insect kills a tree is through larval feeding. And as you can see in the bottom right picture here, there are what we call serpentine galleries. So you can see kind of this S-shaped serpentine-like movement of the larva that moves underneath, it feeds underneath the bark of the tree. And what it is, it's feeding on the tissue. And this feeding disrupts the flow of the nutrients and water, and it can eventually girdle the tree. And over a period of about 3 to 5 years, it can kill the tree. So we wanted to start off with this map that was produced back in 2014, which is kind of a risk assessment as far as what areas are going to see high mortality of ash from EAB. So the areas in red are of the highest risk. And what you can see, what I first wanted to point out was just the abundance of ash in this northeastern and north central part of the state. So as I mentioned, it was first introduced in Michigan. So in this area, it is all red, meaning that there is a high density of ash in these forests. So it has been able to move very quickly through these forests and has over about a period of 7 years moved its way down into Kentucky. And as you can see, this north central part of the state, we have a very high ash composition. There are parts in the east and then parts also in the west where it's a little bit less. But in general, this is an insect that's greatly impacting our forests because we have a relatively high composition of ash in our forests. The next picture, or the next map that I wanted to discuss a little bit is just the distribution map of emerald ash borer. So there's a lot of details on here, but I wanted to point out all of the red dots. So each red dot indicates a county level infestation. So again, as I mentioned, it started off in Michigan and slowly worked its way south, and then has spread out throughout the country, where you can see it's now been found all the way out in Colorado, and just in the last 2 months it's been found down in Texas and then also in Nebraska. So what I want to do now is just bring this down to and discuss a little bit about emerald ash borer, specifically in the state of Kentucky, and how it started here and how it's moved out and where we are today. So we started trapping. So the state, along with the University of Kentucky, started trapping for the emerald ash borer in 2008, but they didn't find anything. But in 2009, they found emerald ash borer in the counties that you can see here in green. And those positive counties were identified from the purple traps that you might have seen hanging in trees around the state. So again, these are the first counties where it was found. In 2010, only 4 more counties were added. In similar fashion in 2011, you can see the expansion of the insect did not move great distances. It was essentially moving to counties nearby that were already infested. The first problem county that popped up was in 2012 in Pike County. In 2009, when, as I mentioned, when EAB was first found, the state set up a quarantine of those counties. So the hope was that they could slow or prevent the spread of the emerald ash borer throughout the state. And then by 3 years later in 2012, when they found it in Pike County, it was very discouraging because it was obvious that the insect had escaped the quarantine. And then 2013, more bad news as it popped up in the southern counties of Whitley and Bell. And then from here on out, the last few years, the populations have been slowly expanding to start filling in the eastern part of the state. So by 2014 and then 2015, again, you see this slow expansion of the emerald ash borer throughout the state, which brings us to this year, 2016, where we found it in a large number of counties, and we have now completely found it in every eastern county. And as you can see, this is what we're most worried about, are these group of about 5 or 6 counties here on the western edge that indicate that the insect is continuing to move on a western front. And we believe in the next few years we'll find it start popping up in this section of the state. So what I wanted to discuss was just some of the different regional perspectives that you might see depending upon what part of the state that you live in. So recall to this map that I showed you earlier of the risk assessment, this north central part of the state, again, is very high with ash species, whereas it's a little bit less in the east and a little bit west in this pocket in the west. So for the north central part of the state, because you have such a high concentration of ash, we're seeing a very large number of ash trees that are currently declining or already dead, which you can see from this picture that was taken at General Butler State Park in the northern part of the state. As for eastern Kentucky, as I mentioned, there is a lower concentration of ash here, but also the fact that it took a few more years for EAB to make it to this part of the state. So for that reason, right now we're seeing a mix of ash decline and mortality, but it is at a much lower scale or much smaller scale than we're seeing in the north central part of the state. As far as western Kentucky, as I mentioned in our previous slide, we have not found EAB there yet. As of right now, there are the different mix of ash levels. So once it does get to this part of the state, it's going to be similar to what we're seeing in the eastern, where you might have pockets of higher level of mortality, or you might have areas where there just simply isn't very much ash in the forest and you won't see much mortality at all. And what I wanted to highlight here is that with these different regional perspectives, a great tool that landowners have is with the Division of Forestry. We have our field personnel that if you contact your regional Kentucky Division of Forestry office, they can send a forester out to your property and they can help you with woodland management advice. So whether you are in the north central part of the state and your ash trees are already dead and you're trying to figure out the next step, or if you're in the western part of the state and you're worried about what the future might hold, you can contact your regional office and they can get a forester out there to walk the property with you and help give you some management advice for your woodlands. The last thing I wanted to mention with emerald ash borer is that in some cases treatment options do exist. And I want to stress that it's usually just for important yard or kind of landscape trees. And the reason for this is that the way that you can treat the tree is through a chemical process. Unfortunately, the chemical process can be expensive, and it has to be done on an annual basis. So this is something that's just not economically feasible across an entire woodland area. But if you do have an ash tree in your front yard that's maybe providing nice shade for your tree or for your house, then it is certainly an option to be able to treat it with chemical to keep that tree alive. I will mention that the ash trees, they can be saved, but they need to be healthy and showing few signs of EAB infestation. So there is a certain point to where once the trees decline so far that the chemical cannot prevent the death of the tree. And finally, homeowners have the option to treat the trees themselves. They can purchase the chemical at an agricultural supply store, or they can hire a commercial applicator. Okay, so the next major issue that we're going to talk about is the Hemlock woolly Adelgid. This is another exotic insect that was accidentally introduced into the United States. It also came from Eastern Asia, and this first occurred in the 1950s. Since that time period, the insect has spread throughout the Hemlock Range in the northeastern part of the United States and causing widespread mortality and decline. So the picture that you have here on your screen is a zoomed in image of the needles of a hemlock, of the hemlock needles. And what you can see, these white kind of puffy balls are called ovisacs. So the insect itself is an Adelgid, and what they do is that inside of this ovisac material, you'll find the female insect. And what she is doing is feeding at the very base of these needles. And as she is feeding, she is pulling out sap from these trees and water and nutrients. And over time, when the tree becomes infested to a certain level, it will start to lose needles, which will prevent new growth and eventually lead to the death of the tree. So this map shows right now where we have confirmed hemlock woolly Adelgid infestation. So I'll point out that this yellowish orange color on the map is the range of hemlock. So what's different for this pest compared to, say, the emerald ash borer is that only the eastern part of the state here is going to be impacted by this, just because it's not likely to find hemlock outside of this area. The counties in blue here are ones that we have confirmed infestations. And the county in red is just an urban infestation that was found in a yard in Lexington. So there are a couple counties here that we haven't found it in yet, but we continue to survey those areas, and it's likely just a matter of time until we find it also in those areas. So just a little bit more information about hemlock woolly Adelgid. So specifically for Kentucky, it was first found in 2006, and as that last map showed, that it could quickly move throughout almost the entire range of hemlock within the state. An interesting fact with weather is that back in 2013, 2014, that weather, we had a very extreme weather period, and that caused the Adelgid populations to decline and crash. It killed off a large number of them. And since that time period, we've been seeing a slow increase in the population levels. But what this did do is give the trees a little bit of a break from the Adelgid so that they could recover a little bit. As far as hemlock mortality within the state, it is kind of spotty and sporadic. And over time, it's unfortunately just going to get worse. But the highest mortality rates that we have seen in the field so far have come from the Redbird Ranger District in the Daniel Boone National Forest. And one thing I always like to touch upon when I'm talking about hemlock woolly Adelgid is the HWA treatment crew that the Kentucky Division of Forestry has. So there is a permanent crew that is headed by Alice Mant, who is our hemlock coordinator for the Division of Forestry. And what she did is she started this program in 2011 and hired two 9-month seasonal employees that go out and treat hemlock trees. And since 2011, they have treated over 123,000 trees. And just this year alone, in 2016, over 23,000 trees. And the reason for this, part of the reason why they're able to do this is that the cost of the chemical that they use, it's an insecticide, to treat these trees to be able to kill the Adelgid, the cost has come down, which allows them to buy it in bulk and to go out to public areas and treat these hemlock trees. So the majority of this work is being done in the Daniel Boone National Forest. So if you're there and you see some trees marked with flagging, especially along some of our the popular trails. A lot of that work is being done by the Division of Forestry to help keep these forest systems intact. So with that, I think we're going to move on to our next pest, and Ellen's going to talk a little bit about invasive plants.
So with invasive plant species, there are going to be many different plant species that are problematic. Each region of the state is going to have different plants that are bigger problems, and the biggest issue here for forest management, for woodland management, is that these invasive species are getting in the way of natural forest regeneration. So in that picture that right here that you can see, in the understory, it is full of bush honeysuckle, and that's really going to be preventing trees from regenerating, other native species from thriving there, certainly, but also the kind of natural regeneration that you need to see if you're doing any kind of harvesting, but especially in the context of what Abe was just talking about with the emerald ash borer. So with all of these dead ash trees, especially in the central part of the state, opening up the canopy, in the understory, you can expect to see those invasive species really taking off and becoming an even larger problem than they had been before. So the most widespread problems across Kentucky are multiflora rose, Japanese honeysuckle, bush honeysuckle, and tree of heaven. And that's widespread because those first three are in pretty much every county in Kentucky. And tree of heaven is in 89 counties. But again, it's going to be on a case-by-case basis, you know, in a particular area, which of those invasive species is going to be the biggest problem. One thing that we did want to highlight are some observed increases in Callery and Bradford pear. They're synonyms, the same problem that we've been seeing, especially in central Kentucky. So in these photos, you can see the flowering tree that is extremely popular in yards, landscape planting, has escaped that setting and is also just kind of taking over a lot of old field sites, as you can see from these photos. So that's something we wanted to highlight because we've been seeing, but is just one of many different invasive species problems, invasive plant species problems. That we could talk about all night, but we're just going to continue moving on. But if you have any particular questions, we can address them afterwards. The next thing I wanted to talk about briefly was fire. So far this year, as of September 20th, KDF has responded to 633 fires across the state. So this is on an estimated 18,764 acres. And they estimate that about 70% of this is caused by arson. Using some estimations from Dr. Stringer here in the Department of Forestry at UK, estimating about $404 per acre, the damage caused by this. That would be about $7 million of damage caused by these fires. So another serious issue. So with that, we're going to take a brief pause because that kind of wraps up some of the major issues across the state that are problematic. Does anybody have any questions about those topics before we jump into more of the regional problems and kind of localized issues?
Now, I will say, Ellen, if we can give people time to type a question, and if they have any, that the numbers that we were looking at with fire, those were from September. Mm-hmm. And just recently, we've added over, we're up to almost 800 fires. So just in the last month, they've been up to at least another 150 fires since that time. So this dry weather that we've been experiencing the last couple weeks, last month, throughout a lot of the eastern part of the state is making that situation worse.
Well, if you don't have any questions right now, you can hang on to them for later. We'll ask again shortly. But now we want to touch on some of the regional issues that we noticed that maybe aren't going to have as big of an impact, killing trees, but are still things that might have come up that you might have gotten questions about depending on where you are, that we just wanted to touch on. So the first of these would be the jumping oak gall. So these are small galls, and you can see this photo here. They're round, button-like discs on the underside of leaves, and inside of each is a tiny wasp larvae. So they can cause brown leaves on oaks in the white oak group in the late spring, sometimes defoliation, but it's rarely a fatal problem, especially of healthy trees. So what happened this year is that several counties in the Knobs area near Louisville had an outbreak much larger than kind of what you'd normally see. So let's see, do we have some more? Yeah. So they're called jumping because the jumping oak gall, because they will detach from the leaf, the galls, and leave these little pock marks. And those galls can kind of jump around a little bit, just the movement of the larva inside. And again, this isn't something, you can see the browning on those leaves there. It might be striking, but it's not something that is going to require, you know, treatment or particular attention, and will probably be less of an issue in the future. Any comments on that, Abe? Yeah,
I will say that in the past, the jumping oak gall has popped up in different parts of the state. We've found it in some of the Northeast, but this year it was here. So the good thing about pests like this that are native versus the exotic pests that we were talking about, such as emerald ash borer, hemlock, woolly Adelgid, is that our trees have evolved over time natural abilities to be able to deal with some of these pests. So with pests like the jumping oak gall that can defoliate a tree when it's very widespread, it's not going to kill the tree, which is the good news. The trees can handle 1 to 2 years easily of defoliation without any kind of major problems, and that's kind of barring any widespread drought or any other complications that could also impact it.
Yeah. So the next thing is another one of those native insects that might, cause some symptoms that are really eye-catching but aren't going to kill the trees. This is the Yellow-Poplar Weevil, also known as the sassafras or magnolia weevil. And a little bit of biology on this insect. Typically, every year there's two populations. There's the adults that are overwintered, so they overwinter as adults, they emerge, that's the first generation, and they're going to be chewing holes in leaves that have kind of a distinctive rice grain shape and look to them. They also chew the buds prior to leaf emergence. Then there's going to be a second generation that those adults lay. So they're going to lay their larvae in the midrib of the leaf, and those larvae are going to feed like leaf miners inside of the leaf, causing some damage. And then once they mature into adults, they're going to feed on the foliage. And that's typically the state that causes the most damage, kind of where you would see something. But this year, we saw the first generation being really large, so a lot of damage caused by those overwintering adults. But then there wasn't kind of an anticipated large second generation. And here's some more photos you can see of the type of damage that the overwintering adults caused, those little brown patches that kind of look like a rice grain. And as Abe mentioned, the great thing, or the really helpful thing for us about these native insects and diseases, is that the trees have natural defenses to them. They also, these insects, have natural predators. So it's probably has something to do with predation from some predatory or parasitic insect that's going to be eating these. So fortunately, we didn't really see a second generation of the Yellow-Poplar Weevil. That was too bad. Based on past outbreaks, we probably won't see this being another major issue for a few years, because the populations of whatever it was that was eating these weevils are also going to be high. And this is not something that's going to be likely to kill or damage the tree.
Yeah, I will say, just to add real quick, that this picture here was taken a couple years ago, and that's when we had a really large outbreak of that second generation. So as Ellen mentioned, this year we saw the first generation, which fed on the leaves and had little holes in them, but we were expecting something similar to this, where you can see the browning. These are all yellow poplar trees across this hillside that were impacted 2 years ago. And I can go back a slide, and that's what these leaves here that show this very heavy browning. When you get a complete canopy covered like that, you get this browning across the landscape. And as I mentioned, this is from 2 years ago, so we are expecting to see this again, but we believe it's because of other predatory insects that fed on that second generation. That's why we didn't see it. But as Ellen mentioned, this is another one of our kind of cyclical native insects that every, depending upon weather and some other circumstances, maybe every 3 to 5 years, you can see local outbreaks of this pest. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started with the next one. That's the Shingle Oak Skeletonizer. So again, this is another native pest that we're dealing with. And with this is a group of 2 or 3, we believe, different moth species that are very much related. And what they do is that they feed on the backside of the shingle oak leaf. So the stage of the insect is the larva. So this caterpillar guy right here. What you get is on the backside of a leaf anywhere from 2 to maybe 10 of these, depending upon the population size. And as they feed, they slowly eat away the green tissue, and they leave this skeletonized appearance, which is what gives them that name. Over time, if you get enough of these, they can cause the entire back of the leaf to turn brown, and this across the entire canopy can turn it brown and make it very noticeable. So this picture here just demonstrates the different levels of infestation. So on a lightly infested tree, you're only going to have a few caterpillars per leaf. As the population numbers get higher, you get more feeding, and which creates more browning and skeletonization on the leaf. And eventually we get all the way to this leaf here on the right, which has been completely skeletonized. At this point, what that does is that makes the whole canopy turn brown. So as you can see in the picture here, you've got the foreground of the normal green shrubbery here compared to the very brown shingle oak trees that are in the back of the picture. So this insect, again, it only feeds on shingle oak. And with that, shingle oak is a bit, it's not an overly common tree that we find in a lot of our forests throughout Kentucky, but you can find certain parts of the state that have a little bit higher concentrations than other. But as far as the actual damage we were seeing this year, you can see from this map there are 2 main spots. So the first one was in between Hardin, Breckenridge, and Grayson County. And then there was a second widespread infestation and damage up in Boone County at Big Bone Lick State Park. Besides that, there are also some more spotty areas of damage throughout the state, and that's represented by these orange dots on the map. So these were locations where maybe individual or 2 or 3 trees in an area were fed upon by this insect, but not like the wide-scale damage that we are seeing in some of these other areas. Okay, so the next topic we're going to move to is Anthracnose. So this is a disease. So what we've been talking about are the native insect pests that we've been dealing with, but this is a disease that is also native, and Anthracnose is just a general term for a group of different fungi that can attack or that can cause decline and dead spots on some of the leaves. So what happens is that as the fungus attacks the tree and feeds or is on the tissue, what you'll see are these brown necrotic spots of dead tissue. So depending upon how bad or how high the levels of infestation are with this, you're going to have either little spots like this on this leaf, or if it's very bad, you're going to have larger areas of the leaf turn brown and die. And the reason why we included this in here as a regional problem is because Anthracnose is very much dependent upon the weather. So in early to mid-spring, the fungus needs a lot of rain for it to be able to successfully move to a new host. And what it does is that it survives on old leaf litter from the previous year, and if there is enough moisture and enough rain in early spring, then it can produce spores, and those spores can move to new leaves and infect the leaves and the shoots of these different trees. The disease impacts a wide variety of hosts, but this year we saw mostly on sycamore, oak, and sometimes maple, but it was especially bad on sycamore this year. Okay, the next regional problem that we're going to talk about are some of the abnormal weather conditions. So there are two that I wanted to highlight today, and the first here is of this picture that we're seeing is hail damage. So this picture was taken in Breckinridge County. This was taken in June. The damage occurred in May. So as you can see, where you would be expecting a full canopy of leaves, we're seeing in some of these cases very little to no leaves, to some where they're just starting to reshoot from the tree. So this hail damage, again, as I said, happened in Breckinridge County from a storm in May, but the same storm also caused damage in Carter County, which is very similar. Both of these storms had damage that were anywhere from 3 to 5 miles long and a half to a mile wide. And the damage from this came from hail. And from talking to local landowners in the area, they said in some places it was a golf ball size hail that completely defoliated the trees in this area. This is also similar to some of our native pests, to where when they do attack trees, it's not an automatic death sentence for these trees. They can deal with this defoliation as long as it's not something that occurs year in, year out. So more than likely, these trees next year will leaf out just fine, and you really won't be able to notice that there were any major impacts to them. And then one more interesting thing related to weather that I touched upon a little bit earlier with the Hemlock woolly Adelgid is that in periods of extreme cold, they can actually knock back some of these insects, such as the Hemlock woolly Adelgid.
So before we kind of move on to the next section, we're just going to wrap up some of those regional problems. I wanted to come to your all's questions and just give you another opportunity to ask some questions on anything we've discussed so far. And Abe, I noticed that we got a question that just came in a little bit ago about the size of the tree. How big does a tree have to be before it is susceptible to the emerald ash borer or to Hemlock woolly Adelgid? Okay,
so the answer for this is different for ash versus the hemlock. So with ash trees with the emerald ash borer, they have found that the insect can attack and kill trees that have as small of a diameter as little as 1 inch. So it does not need to be a very big tree for these insects to attack it, unfortunately. As far as the hemlock and with the Hemlock woolly Adelgid, since these insects are feeding on the needles of the tree, they will attack any age class of that tree. So anything from seedlings all the way up to very mature large trees.
Any other questions before we move on to the next component, talking about some future threats to keep an eye out for? So I think we'll just move on, and this is where I'm going to put in a plug for Abe, that to keep an eye out for anything unusual. So this could be large-scale tree death, large patches of dead leaves, defoliation, general tree decline, storm damage, unfamiliar damage, really anything that if it's causing damage in a large kind of patch, if you know what it is or if you don't know what it is, report them to Abe, and he can kind of connect you to what's going on in the state, report that to people in other parts of the state. This is going to be, we're going to talk about some future threats, potential future threats, and especially if you see anything that matches up with those or something that's moving to a new region, please do contact Abe about that.
Yeah, my contact information is right here on the screen, so feel free to shoot me an email anytime or give me a call. But again, as Ellen mentioned, I'm just really interested in having a good sense for what the health conditions are in our forests across the state. So again, any kind of large-scale issues that just don't quite look right, feel free to take a picture and send them to me an email, or contact your extension agent, and they can get in contact with me, and we can figure out what's going on, and then that way I can help you guys out, but then also I can also have a better idea as far as what our health situation is in the state. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump into our next future threats. So this section is just going to talk about things that we have not seen yet here in Kentucky, but we believe that there is either a small chance, depending upon the pest, or there's a good chance that we might see these in the future. And part of the reason for that is that the pests that we're going to talk about are very close to our borders already. So the first one is Thousand Cankers disease. This is a disease of walnuts, and we want to talk about this because right now Thousand Cankers disease is found north of us in Ohio, in Indiana. It is found south of us in Tennessee, and it has also been found in Virginia and North Carolina. So really we're starting to get almost surrounded by this disease. So again, we do not have this yet in the state, but this is something that we want to kind of keep people aware of and kind of on the lookout for in case you see a large patch of maybe walnut trees starting to decline or die, so that we can keep an eye on it and tackle the issue before it gets widespread in the state. So just to give you a little bit of information about this, the disease itself is moved around by an insect. So the insect is commonly known as the walnut twig beetle, and this is a very tiny insect. It's a little bit smaller than the size of the head of a pencil lead, and with that, what it does is that it carries around this fungus. So the fungus itself is dependent upon this insect to move it from tree to tree. What happens is that the beetle itself will start feeding underneath the bark of smaller branches, and as it's feeding in the wood, the fungus then jumps off of the insect and will make its home in the tree. And what can happen is that as the fungus starts attacking the tree, you'll see these brown necrotic dying tissue. And over time, when you get enough of these beetles attacking the tree, you get enough fungus in it to completely cause cankers throughout the stem, which will then coalesce and turn and cause girdling of the tree, which will then cause, as we see here, the signs of it, which are the flagging, the leaf yellowing, and branch dieback throughout the tree. The name, again, Thousand Cankers, is just because it takes a large number of these beetles to attack the tree. So a few here or there is not enough. You need a large number of them to attack, with them carrying the fungus with it in order for it to cause this dieback and decline in the walnut trees. So this picture here just gives you a little bit idea of what you'll see. So the beetles will typically start off by attacking the canopy or the upper portion of the tree, and that's where you'll start to see some of this branch dieback. So if you're out or you notice this on your property or maybe on your drive to work that you're seeing a group of walnut trees that have some similar dieback symptoms, that's the kind of information that you can pass along to me, and I'd be happy to check it out, and we can look to make sure, try our best to keep this disease out of the state. The next pest that we want to quickly touch upon here is the Asian longhorn beetle. Again, this is another insect that kills trees, but it's not found here in Kentucky. This was also accidentally introduced from Asia. As of right now, there are active infestations in Ohio. They are also in New York and also Massachusetts. There were infestations in New Jersey and Chicago that have been successfully eradicated. So the good news about this is that we have a much better control over this insect than compared to the emerald ash borer. So something vital with this is to find it as early as possible so that we can get quarantine programs in place to be able to deal with it. So to talk a little bit more about the insect itself, so this picture here shows you the very distinct nature of the insect with the white dots on the black body. As you can see from the antenna here, that's where it gets its name, longhorn beetle. And the good news about this beetle is that it's very large and it's quite slow and lazy. So it's very easy to identify, and it doesn't like to move off to new trees. So if we catch this early enough, there's a good chance you can get programs in place to keep it there without it spreading too far. Similar to the emerald ash borer, the damage comes from the larval stage, so not the adult stage, but the larval stage, which actually feeds similar to EAB underneath the bark of the tree, feeding on that tissue, which disrupts the movement of, again, water and nutrients from the roots and the leaves and back and forth, which will eventually lead to decline of the tree and eventual death. This picture here just gives you a good representation of what another sign is. So without seeing the adult beetle itself, you can see the exit holes are very common. So this is what the beetle will chew a hole. Again, it's a little bit smaller than the size of a dime, and you'll see the insect chew these holes, and this can happen from anywhere in the summer through fall. So if you're seeing decline in maple trees, I forgot to mention that's the main host for this is maple. That's what over 99% of the host trees in the U.S. that we found it on has been on maple. So that's going to be the one you're going to want to keep your eyes on the most. If you see holes, exit holes like this, or any kind of insects that look similar to that, that would be one that we really want to keep an eye on, that you would want to contact myself or your extension agent right away.
So next, I just want to briefly mention another invasive, not native potential problem. That's sudden oak death. So this is a disease, and it has been found in Kentucky before, but never out kind of in woodland settings. It has been found in kind of more of a nursery setting, which is how it's been moved around over large distances. So it is probably native somewhere in Asia. We really don't know. But right now on the West Coast, it's been causing mortality in oaks and tan oaks. And we're worried about it for this area because of its potential impact to oaks. So one of the problems with this disease is that it has an extremely wide host range. So on most of those hosts, it's going to cause little damage. So it's going to do kind of what this photo shows. Maybe some foliar damage here, some leaf spots on the tip, right here at the base where water would collect. This disease moves through water, so you're probably going to see symptoms on the leaf wherever water would normally collect. But on a few species, it's a major problem, and it can kill the tree. So it causes lethal cankers in the trunk and branches that will, again, cut off circulation and over time kill the tree. So one kind of thing to look for is that in order for it to get here, it would have to move on plant material, on infected soil, something like that. So just encouraging people to monitor newly purchased ornamentals from nurseries. Camellias and rhododendrons are especially kind of known for having sudden oak death and spreading it out from there. And also any kind of unusual leaf symptoms that you might not normally see. The other thing I wanted to mention is gypsy moth. So you probably have heard of this before. While it's not in Kentucky right now, it has been slowly approaching Kentucky from the northeast for quite some time. So this is an invasive insect, and it causes really heavy defoliation. So in these photos here, and this one, you can see the larvae of the gypsy moth completely defoliating this branch. It can cause over 50% defoliation in initial years, and it has a very wide host range. So the larvae will eat the leaves, they can cause damage, and for many of our natives, we talked about defoliation not really being a problem because those native trees are adapted. They know they have defenses to the native defoliators, and the native defoliators typically don't cause as much defoliation. With the gypsy moth, the thing that's troublesome and problematic about it is that it can cause over 50% severe defoliation that can weaken trees, make them susceptible to other problems, or if they're already weakened, kind of throw them over the edge. So that's something that it's going to continue moving this way. The slower it moves, the better. Right now it's in Ohio. We have a map here so you can see West Virginia. The females of the European gypsy moth don't fly. So that slows down their spread quite a bit. I think in Kentucky we've detected the males that can fly, but it's not enough to establish a population. What's really going to speed up its spread, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, is if people are moving it around.
Yeah, I will say that the University of Kentucky, there's a cooperative agricultural pest survey, and we have state entomologists that survey for these different insects, and a lot of them across the state, such as Thousand Cankers disease. But one of them that they've been doing for past 15 or 20 years is trapping for gypsy moth. So this might be, you might have seen the trap when you're out driving around some of the back roads of Kentucky. It's usually a triangle-shaped cardboard box that is usually hammered onto the trees, and it's anytime from color from red to sometimes you'll see it is gray or orange. So if you've ever seen those boxes on trees as you've been driving around, those are traps for the gypsy moth. So we are trying to keep an eye, as Ellen said, on the male moths, which help give us an idea as far as what some of the population numbers are in the area. So the insect has been found in Kentucky, but there's no established population. So that's the good news, is that we're doing our best to slow the spread of it into the state because of the impacts that it can have on our oak species.
So another thing I just wanted to put on your radar that is not a problem in Kentucky or really anywhere in this region right now is Laurel Wilt. So it's a newly reported disease. It's spread by ambrosia beetles, so little beetles, but it's a fungal disease again. And it causes extensive death of red bay laurel, so it's been found in kind of southeastern coastal areas, Florida, moving around from there. And while it's a really big problem there, we're not really sure what it's going to mean this far north. It might not be a problem, but sassafras is another host for it. So will this be a problem in the future, or won't it? We don't really know, but just another thing to keep on your radar. So there are also current threats that might either reappear or spread. So these are things we've already discussed, but just to mention again, emerald ash borer spreading to new counties in the western and southern part of the state. Reoccurring damage from jumping oak gall, Yellow-Poplar Weevil, Shingle Oak Skeletonizer, and diseases. Other native defoliating pests that we haven't mentioned today, but like forest tent caterpillar that you probably will see, although typically the damage won't be too severe. Keep an eye out for these things, and if you see them, report them to Abe. So with that, we just want to leave you with a few forest health tips to remember. We talked a lot about how these diseases are spreading and that they're kind of non-native. They depend on humans in some cases to be spread to new areas. They might be able to move locally, but what's really driving their success is us moving them around in firewood. So don't move firewood, and encourage people not to move firewood, buy firewood locally. Good woodland management, especially promoting high diversity of tree species, protects you and your woodlands. We don't know what the next invasive insect or disease that's going to come in will be. But what we do know is that the more diverse and the more healthy your woodland is, the more resilient it's going to be. So the bigger buffer you're going to get yourself and those trees from any particular damage. And then, as if we haven't said it enough, but we just want to say it again, if you see something unusual, let Abe Nielsen know. And with that, we're going to open it up for some questions.
Well, while we're waiting for some questions, I can't thank you all enough. It was a great presentation. So much information, a lot of things to kind of keep up with, you know. Ellen, I was glad to hear you talk about woodland management. You know, I work a lot with woodland owners, and we get a chance to try to encourage them to manage their property. So I think that's just a great piece of advice. If they can kind of be out there and be vigilant in the woods, they'll spot things early. Abe, I was going to ask you a little bit about, I know you did Forest Health, but the Kentucky Division of Forestry is a pretty good-sized agency and does a lot of other things. Would you mention a little bit about the foresters that can come out and work with woodland owners a little bit? Because I'm sure we've got some woodland owners out there in the audience that could benefit from those services.
Yeah, certainly.
As well.
So as I mentioned a little bit when I was talking about emerald ash borer across the state, one of the great services that the Division of Forestry offers is the free of charge to have a forester come out and visit your property, and they can do a lot of things for you. It can, depending upon your goals. So if you have goals, whether it be to increase wildlife on your property, maybe for hunting, or if you're just looking to kind of preserve your forest, or maybe you're interested in harvesting your property for timber, they can come out, write up an individual plan just for you, and figure out what goals that you have and what your interests are, and they can tailor a plan for you and help you out. And again, Forest Health is mentioned in every single one of those plans, so they will scout for what species you have. They will help you figure out if there are any pests that you have to worry about or anything that you might have to deal with. So.
Okay. Well, great service. I'd encourage folks to take advantage of that. Really, it's awesome. It really is. We had a question come up. What determines a forest versus the woods? I think it's really semantics largely. A lot of times folks think of forest like the Daniel Boone National Forest, and they may think of their woods as like their backyard or smaller tracts. But generally, they're kind of interchangeable a lot. We use those terms pretty much interchangeably. But along those lines, Abe, are there any restrictions as far as the size of property that you all can come out and work with?
Yes. So for the management plans, they need to have a limit of at least 10 acres for them to work with. So they can still come out. We've had foresters just come out and help ID some trees on the property, or do some other things on smaller scales, or maybe help advise what species to replant at a smaller scale if you've had ash mortality from the emerald ash borer, and that's been at a smaller scale. But to be able to receive some of the federal funding available or cost share assistance with maybe some invasive plant removal, you have to have a minimum of a 10-acre wooded property.
Okay. Looks like there's some more questions coming in there.
So we got a question about thousand cankers disease on walnuts, and how severe it is when it's been found. Will it kill off all of the walnuts in an affected area?
Okay. Yeah. So this is an interesting question that's still developing. What's a little bit different about the thousand cankers disease in walnut is that the beetle itself is native to the western part of the United States. So with some of the exotic species that we've been dealing with, they've come from Asia, and they're completely in a new area. So this is still in the United States. So it's a little bit of a different relationship here with our walnut trees. So our eastern walnut is not native to the western part of the state, but they a while ago, eastern walnut were taken over to parts of the west in Colorado, and that's when they realized that some of their walnut trees there were dying, and that's what this first problem started to arise. And so when it moved over here into Tennessee back in 2010, they noticed a slow decline. So it's different than emerald ash borer in the fact that EAB is a very quick killer. It's 3 to 5 years. With the mortality that they've seen down in Tennessee, it has taken at least 5 years, and those are the trees they're just now starting to see to die. But even that, just in the last couple of years, there has been the decline has started to slow down. So we don't know exactly what the reason for that is, but it's not anywhere close to the same level as the emerald ash borer, which is the good news for us because we have a lot of walnut in the state. But as it was hinted at one of the earlier slides, they think that maybe the reason why it has slowed down in the last couple of years was because of that very cold weather that we had 2 years ago. So they don't know if that knocked back some of the insect populations, but it hasn't been spreading near as fast, which is good, and it's not killing the trees very quickly. It's been much of a very slow decline throughout the tree. So it gives us more time to identify where it is, and then to also get some management plans in place.
Excellent. Good response. And looks like we got a few more questions come in. Let's see.
So we have a question on if the nuts on a tree do not have good fruit in them by the time they hit the ground, does your tree have some kind of damage? And I think important to that, who can you contact about that? So I don't know, Abe, what do you think? I without knowing the situation, it would be hard for me to comment on what could potentially be causing that poor fruit development.
it kind of gets an interesting question because it kind of based upon the species that you're dealing with, whether it's oak or if it's something different as far as what the nuts might be. There are some diseases that can impact the fruit, but usually it's not anything to be too overly concerned about. But questions like that are things, again, that you can reach out to me in an email, give me a call sometime, and we can can discuss a little bit more specifics. You can send me pictures. We can identify the species and figure out exactly what's going on. So the other part of that question was contacting someone to look at our trees. So I can be a contact point for specific forest health issues, but you can also look up Kentucky Division of Forestry on the internet. You'll find contact information for our state office and then also for the 5 regional offices that we have throughout the state. So that's going to be your first contact. And then what we can do is we can have a phone conversation, maybe trade some pictures to figure out what's going on. And if it's warranted, we'll send a forester out to take a look at the property and we can figure out more of what's going on.
And depending on the type of tree and their location, your county cooperative extension agent could be a really good resource too. If this is an issue that other people nearby are seeing, or connecting you to other specialists.
Yeah, exactly, because a lot of times we end up using the local extension office to take samples to, because we might be able to identify that it is a disease, but we don't know what kind of disease. So we can take samples to the local UK extension office. So that's another great resource that you should use, and then they can send samples off to a diagnostic lab and get the exact problem figured out, and then they can give you the management guidelines for it.
Right. That's excellent. I think that brings up a great point. This is really a partnership. Forest Health's a partnership of all of us. Certainly you all are woodland owners or individuals with trees in your yards, and you care about them. But, we need to know what's going on with them so we can kind of protect the larger population of trees.
There's a lot of people that are doing some similar work here that we're all trying to work together. So there are a lot of avenues to reach out. And if someone doesn't know the answer, then they probably know someone that can help you out with it.
That's a good point. I know many times I'll get a picture or a question from somebody, and it's nice to have this network that we can kind of all work together on. So, ultimately, we're just trying to serve the landowners and the citizens out there in the state and make sure the trees are as healthy as possible. So, looks like we got another question come in.
This is a question about, is there a borer that that causes small holes about the size of a nickel or a dime in a ring around a tree, maple in Kentucky, and will it kill the tree? So the first thing that comes to my mind isn't a borer as much as it is a sapsucker, which is a type of woodpecker that would cause that kind of damage, or a true woodpecker that would cause kind of a different looking hole in a tree, but you might also get those large holes in the side. Can you think of anything else?
I think the main thing that we usually look at is kind of the pattern. So with a sapsucker, I think kind of mentioned in this question, it's more in a ring, or it's a very obvious pattern, whereas more insects, it's going to be a bit more sporadic throughout the tree. So my guess, without seeing anything else, would be that's probably what you're dealing with.
And I will say, if it is a sapsucker, it's not something that you really have to be concerned about. There's not a lot you can do about it, but it's also not going to be something that really is going to damage your tree. And if it's woodpecker damage, then probably the tree already has a lot of insects tunneling within it, and that's what the woodpecker is looking for. Right. So neither of those are going to be things that are going to require management on your end, most likely.
Looks like we've had a question about who could come out and help landowners make decisions about thinning their trees. And again, I think that would go back, Abe, to our service foresters with the Kentucky Division of Forestry. Again, these are trained foresters, and they will work with you all on whatever you're trying to accomplish. They'll try to make sure that it's sustainably done and most efficiently done as well. So take advantage of that resource. If you do have more than 10 acres, let them know that you want a stewardship plan for your property. And if it's smaller than that, still give them a call, and they can still offer some advice or guidance on those smaller tracts.
Yeah, and I'll mention again that we have 5 regional offices. So again, if you're up on the internet, you can Google the Kentucky Division of Forestry, and you'll find the contact information for these different regional offices. We have a map that lists each county, and you can look at what county you're in, get lined up with the right regional office, and give them a call, and they can set up an appointment to come out and take a look at your property.
So we had a follow-up. Someone wanted to know a little bit more about woodpeckers. Abe, would you like to?
Yeah, so I think that's just to clarify. So when we're saying sapsucker, that is just a type of a woodpecker or the bird. So that's that's what the damage is. So I think that's hopefully clarifies that question a little bit.
And the larger holes, so sapsuckers will actually drink the kind of sap of the tree. And you also have woodpeckers that are looking for insects that are living within the tree, tunneling, causing damage. So that's going to be on trees that are already probably significantly damaged, dying, or already dead. Whereas sapsuckers are going to be affecting trees with active circulation, healthy trees as well.
These are great questions, and I'd certainly encourage y'all, please take advantage of this expertise we have here tonight. And we're really excited to have you all with us, and the webinar was absolutely great. I will mention that we are recording this webinar, so it will be available for future watching. But right now, if you do have any questions, please use the chat pod to get them in.
Yeah, we'll say, just to kind of wrap up a little bit about our conversation today. So we covered a large number of topics, and when you talk about this all at one time, it can kind of come off as doom and gloom. But what I do want to mention is that a lot of what we covered are kind of native pests that, again, are not going to attack your tree one year and kill it the next. Besides the emerald ash borer and hemlock woolly Adelgid, which are the main ones that we're really dealing with right now that are causing a lot of mortality, a lot of the other native pests that we're dealing with, again, they pop up in certain spots every year, and then their population numbers will decline, and they'll move on to a new part of the state. So again, it'd be great if you see these things to report it, but we don't want people kind of walking away thinking that all their trees are going to die.
Sure.
A lot of these native problems, again, are just kind of more aesthetic issues than any long-term health problems. So.
Yeah, and going back to that, I mean, I think looking at Kentucky in the context of other regions of the country for forest health really emphasizes the strength of our forests, the valuable resource that they are for us, because when you look in other states and other regions, they don't have, they have many more problems. So just today I saw a news report out of California that 66 million trees have been killed there from a combination of drought, bark beetles, and sudden oak death. And just huge damage that would then lead to more fires. And while we're obviously going to be focusing on what we can to address what's currently happening, it's not a doom and gloom situation. It's something where we want to do the best to stay on top of things, be aware of new problems as they come in, and protect this really valuable resource that we have.
It looks like we had a follow-up question there about the woodpeckers. So the question was, so should we be concerned about our trees if we have woodpeckers? I seem to have my share of woodpeckers. Yeah, okay. So yeah, we'll try to clarify this. Sorry if there's been any confusion with this. There are many species of woodpeckers in our forest, and they are not going to be any major problem to your tree. They are just looking for the insects that are on the tree themselves. So if you see a large number on your property, it doesn't mean that your trees are dying or there's any issue. It just more than likely means you have a nice, diverse forest and a healthy forest. So it's nothing to be worried about.
I think the biggest problem I've heard of them is people getting annoyed from their sound if they are too close to their home, but probably not a major issue for your trees.
All right. Well, if there's any more questions, please get the chat pod. Use it now. We're going to be wrapping up here in just a moment. I guess, are there any parting answers or things you want to share before we sign off tonight?
No, I think, again, it's just there's a lot of resources out there for you, and I hope that we've touched upon them tonight. So if you have more questions, again, feel free to reach out to myself or Ellen or Billy. We got a lot of people that are willing to help you guys out. So you should have our contact information, and if we can't get the answers for you, then we can find someone who can. So.
Yeah, you can always go to ukforestry.org, and we can get you pointed in the right direction if you didn't have a pencil or pen to mark any of this down. Okay, some closing thoughts real quick. I do want to let you know that this is the first in our fall webinar series for this year. We have 4 additional webinars that will be coming up. The next one is on November 10th, and we're going to be talking about how to implement a sustainable timber harvest. Certainly, timber harvesting and the wood products we get out of Kentucky's forests are an important asset. They contribute to a wood industry that's over $15 billion, employs many thousands of people, but landowners are really the source of a lot of that timber. But we want to make sure that we're doing things the right way. And then a little later on in the month, on November 22nd, we're going to be talking about how you go about marking your boundaries. This is an important topic for a lot of people, so we're going to have a presenter talking about that. And then on December 6th, we're going to be talking about preventing wildlife damage. This could be really around your home, gardens, or tree plantings. And then we're going to wrap up on December 15th on how to care for your woodlands, just a kind of a how-to guide about going about caring for your woodlands. So please join us for one of those webinars. And again, we'd like to thank all of the county extension agents for serving as hosts. We really appreciate you all as viewers out there, whether you're at home or at a county extension office, for spending the evening with us. And I would like to acknowledge Renee Williams behind the scenes, who does everything to make this come off without a hitch mostly. And Renee, thank you so much. And Abe, again, thank you. Thanks to the Kentucky Division of Forestry for all the great services. Ellen, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Really appreciate it. And folks, we'll talk to you later. And thanks for joining us.